Thank you for tuning in to this sermon podcast from Redeeming Hope. We exist as a family of faith that follows Jesus and helps others find him by living all of life as missionaries of hope. If you want more information about our church or would like to support our ministry, go to our website at redeeminghope.org. Please enjoy this sermon podcast.
We are concluding our prayer series, Thy Kingdom Come, today by looking at Matthew 26 and Jesus' prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn with me there. As you're turning there, I want to tell you about an experience that I had about a month ago. I was coming back from a couple weeks of missionary work across 2 continents, and I was flying from Togo, Africa, and here's my flight trajectory because it will matter. Okay, Togo to Paris, okay, Paris to Atlanta to Nashville. All right, that was my trajectory. So I'm in Paris, and they're about ready to board our flight from the transatlantic flight, and they came over the loudspeaker and said that one of the, those little trolley cars that they drive on the tarmac, one of them ran into the landing gear of the plane that we were about ready to board and took it out of commission. Okay, so it was completely like the plane was not safe to take off. And so they said, hey, we got to get you a new plane. So delayed like 4 or 5 hours. I was going to miss, of course, my Atlanta to Nashville flight, my last leg. So I'm at the gate and I'm talking with the lady and I'm trying to figure out what to do. And essentially she said, there's one, based on the new trajectory of your time when you landed in Atlanta, there's one flight that can get you from Atlanta to Nashville, but it's like super expensive. It's literally about 10 times more than what it typically would be. So I ended up going for it. I'm going to try to fight Air France to give me the money back later. I'm still in the process of that right now. So I bought this flight, and everything was supposed to work out timing-wise. But here's the problem. The new flight was delayed by like 2 more hours, okay? So I'm sitting there on the tarmac, and here's my situation. As we took off from Paris, this 8.5-hour flight, here's the situation. The situation is this. I'm landing in Atlanta. I've got to go through customs, security, get my bag, get on the other side of the largest airport in the country, from international to like hyper domestic. It's only like a 45-minute flight. And I have to do that in 45 minutes. Okay. So I'm going on about 30 hours straight of being awake. I'm traveling. It's a long flight already to that point. And I am going to tell you, I was not handling it well. Okay. I'm like sitting there, I'm seething. I'm angry because here's the thing. I wanted to get home to see Autumn before she went to bed. I couldn't do that. Then I'm fearful because I bought this flight. And what if I miss the flight? What if I have to stay another night in Atlanta? And all the plans are cascading, and I just was not. And then here's the thing. I'm sitting there in the metal tube 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. There's nothing I can do about it. Like I can't press the button enough times to make the plane go faster, right? So it's like there's nothing I can do about it. And I was, to be quite frank, the jet lag, the missionary work, all that stuff, I was just overwhelmed with despair. I'm just like, what in the world is going on? I was feeling that knot in the pit of my stomach. So here's my question for you this morning. Have you ever felt a knot in the pit of your stomach? Have you ever felt that? Yeah, okay, I think so. I think that's a pretty common human experience, right? And sometimes that can hit with emotions. Sometimes that can hit with our finances. Sometimes that can hit with our health or work or relationships. There's actually a little image that should be up here next. It can kind of feel like you're drowning. And have you ever felt like the train has left the station with your emotions and there's nothing you can do about it? Like you're just feeling it. You're just going down the wind, and it's either fear or it's anger, and there's just nothing you can do. It's just carrying you away. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, because Jesus' time in the Garden of Gethsemane, it teaches us why and how we can turn to God in prayer when we feel this way. And I want to add a caveat before we read the text. It's so interesting because Chris and I don't communicate about we don't align what we're doing, but legitimately it's like every single time there's an alignment with what's shared in the little encouragement beforehand in this. Because the caveat for us today is this, is that Jesus is not simply an example. Jesus is our substitute. Most people go to the Garden of Gethsemane and look at the prayer of Jesus, and this is what they say. They say, well, Jesus prayed in the garden under incredible duress, right? He was really upset. So now we can and should pray like Jesus in faith when we're in the midst of distress, right? Like Jesus did it, now we can do it. No, that's not what we're doing. This is truly, when you get underneath it, when you look at the gospel, this is what we're seeing, is that Jesus' prayer in the garden equips us to understand weakness, to understand dependency and trust because of what Jesus has already done for us by his prayer. Like the prayer is not simply an example. The prayer is doing a work for you and me to equip us to turn to God when we feel the knot in the pit of our stomach, when we feel fear, when we feel anger, when we feel like the train has left the station and there's nothing we can do. Jesus has already done a work for you and me to equip us to turn to him. So it's not Jesus as example, it's Jesus as substitute. So with that, let's look at Matthew 26, starting in verse 36. This is what it says. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So you could not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." This is God's word. We're going to look at 3 points in the text today: the agony, the fall, and the garden. The agony, the fall, and the garden. And I do want to just add a quick caveat here, especially for our first point. There's a sermon by Tim Keller called The Dark Garden that I listened to that pretty heavily influenced my understanding of agony and what Jesus was going through in the garden. So whenever there's a sermon that I'm like, you know what, this significantly shifts a point or significantly has influenced my sermon, I just want to be upfront with you guys that some of these ideas are not original to me, especially in the first point. That's a great sermon if you want to go take a look at it. So let's pray here for a moment. Let's invite God to come in with us, and let's look and see what he has for us today. Dear Jesus, we thank you that you have prayed for us. We have thank you that actually you have prayed for us with your high priestly prayer, that you in the Garden of Gethsemane, you're not simply doing this as an example, but you're truly going through something and then modeling how we can then do it because of what you have done for us. And so I just pray that we would see you as our substitute, taking the wrath of God, experiencing the agony that we deserved, and then help us turn to you in these moments where we are overwhelmed, where we are in despair, and then meet us in these places in your name. Amen. So we're going to look at the first 2 verses of Matthew 26 that we read a minute ago, and I'll just read them again for a reminder. Jesus went with them to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he began to say to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." So Jesus is bringing his disciples with him. This is literally an hour or two before, a couple hours maybe, before he is arrested and will start his kind of the culmination of his passion, the reason why he came. And so he takes with him that he leaves the rest of the disciples, but the 3 closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, he says, let's go deeper into the garden together. And then he leaves them and says, I'm going to go even deeper, completely alone. Nobody would have been there at that time of night. And he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death." And so this is something unique. Up to this point in the narrative of Jesus, as we read about his life, we actually have a lot of information about the 3 years of Jesus' ministry if you pull all the Gospels together. We can actually kind of have a little timeline about what he's done, where he's been. And what's interesting is that up to this point, Jesus has been kind of calm and cool and collected. Now, of course, there are times where it says he wept at the tomb of Lazarus. He's been angry, but we've never seen Jesus overwhelmed at this point. We've always seen him strategic in his actions. But here in the garden, we see something different. Jesus is overwhelmed. That knot that we experience in the pit of our stomach, this is what Jesus is experiencing in the garden. And it's remarkable because up to this point, we've never seen this. I mean, Jesus was in a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee in a storm, and the disciples were so fearful about all of the raging seas around them. They think the boat's going to sink, and Jesus is sleeping. And he gets out and he's like, he calms the storm. And he looks at him and is like, guys, where's your faith? Like, what are you doing? Like, that's what Jesus, that's what we see Jesus over again modeling peace and composure. But here, he has that knot. He is completely overwhelmed, and it has major implications for us. So one of the things is that why is Jesus overwhelmed here? Because we know we don't even have to go back for any other thing outside of Matthew 26. In Matthew 26, we know that Jesus knows he's going to die. He's got no new information. He says, I'm going to die. He's been talking about it. In Matthew 26, he talks about it. He knows that Judas is going to betray him. Matthew 26 tells us that Jesus is having this interaction with the disciples and with Judas. Jesus knows that Peter is going to betray him and the disciples are going to abandon him. He knows he's going to be alone. So why is he in this distress and agony if he has no new information? Something unique is beginning to happen to him in the garden. And all of these words are different. Even though in the text, in the ESV, it says sorrowful twice, those are two completely different words. Because Jesus is starting saying, I'm very sorrowful. That's this word distressed. He is disquieted. This idea of being troubled is the idea of anxiousness. He's feeling anxiety. He's feeling, again, getting that pit in your stomach feeling is what Jesus is experiencing. And then finally, kind of the capstone, the second time when he tells his disciples, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death, that word is talking about being overwhelmed with sorrow, being grieving, being crushed to the point of death. And it's actually, that word is where we get our word for peril from. So it's the idea Jesus is in peril. So you think overwhelmed, completely unable to handle things. Like he is struggling here. He's feeling stuck and anxious. And I think we've all been there where we think, man, this feels like my life is over. And this is where Jesus is. And it's important for us to understand this because we believe here at Redeeming Hope that Jesus is fully God and fully man, which means that he is fully and completely God, eternal. But yet we see in Philippians 2 that he, in humility, laid aside his divinity and cloaked himself or fully took on humanity, which means that he experienced every single emotion, every single temptation, every single thing that you and I experience. He experienced it. And he actually laid aside his rights and his powers. So he experienced our emotions that we feel fully as a man. So he was fully God, but he laid aside all of the access to his power and completely lived his life as a man, fully dependent, fully submitted to his Father. So the life that Jesus lived, in one sense, is something that we could do if we were perfectly following him because he did not access his divine powers in these moments. And as a kid growing up hearing this, I never quite got that. I always kind of felt like, well, he was fully God, so he could just kind of like check out on the cross, right? Like that's kind of how I thought about that. But no, he deeply chose to experience every human emotion. And he had to do that. It says he's been tempted in every way, yet without sin, to become a perfect and faithful high priest for us. So what is actually happening here with Jesus? He's experiencing this deep anxiety. What is the source of his anxiety? And I want to argue that his cup is beginning. In a moment, we're going to read about the cup that Jesus asked, please let this cup pass from me. And it says that he began to be sorrowful as he came into the garden, as he was walking in the garden. And the cup, throughout all of prophetic literature, throughout all the Bible, the cup is a cup of God's wrath. God's wrath has always been depicted as a cup that is being filled up. We see in Psalm 75, it says, for the hand of the wicked, there's a cup with foaming wine, well mixed, and he pours out from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to the dregs. Like that is this picture of God's wrath, is like a cup being filled up. And what's happening in Gethsemane is not new information. It's a new experience of what it is going to be like on the cross. He is beginning to see the cup of God's wrath. He's beginning to see and beginning to taste and experience what this sacrifice is going to mean for him. And he is overwhelmed. He is experiencing in the garden separation from God. Now, by the way, that is what hell is. Hell is not, as we think about it in popular culture, a place of torment and fire. It is actually, the definition of hell is the full removal of God's felt presence. When God fully removes himself from a place completely, the vacuum that is created by the removal of his felt presence, that is what hell is. And whatever happens in there is what's created when God's presence is absent, or his felt presence is absent, which means that heaven is the place where God's presence is fully experienced. He is fully with his people, unadulterated, unfiltered, unmarred by sin. God's presence is fully felt and experienced. That's what heaven is. And so we see in this moment that Jesus, as he's entering into the garden, he is beginning to feel what hell is. And he's actually the only human being that's ever lived on this earth that experienced the full removal of God's presence while on this earth. And that was Jesus. So he's experiencing separation from God, and he begins to experience the cup of God's wrath on all rebellion and sin poured out onto him. So this is an unfathomable thing. I can't wrap my brain around it. I don't think we can today. But just think about that. Every sin, every murder, every harm, everything that has ever been perpetrated, everything that's ever been done in all of human history, every sin, the wrath, the justice, the shame, the guilt that all of these things have incurred is being experienced by Jesus in a moment, like in a span of a few hours. Think about it. All of humanity, from Adam to the end of time, Jesus is taking on every guilt, shame, sin, the justice, the anger, the wrath of God. He's taking on all of this in a short span of time, and he's beginning to see that this is what he's gonna experience. We're gonna have two quotes from Jonathan Edwards, who wrote a sermon on this and says it in a lot better language than I ever could. So I wanted to put it up here, do two quotes. But it seems that at this time, God gave him an extraordinary view of the cup, a sense of that wrath that was to be poured out upon him, and of those amazing sufferings that he was to undergo, was strongly impressed on his mind by the immediate power of God, so that he had far more full and lively apprehensions of the bitterness of the cup which he was to drink than he ever had before. And these apprehensions were so terrible that his feeble human nature shrunk at the sight and was ready to sink. Now, one might ask, why did God do this? If Jesus was going to experience it fully on the cross, why in the garden? This was hours before his crucifixion. Why did Jesus begin to get a hint or a picture of this? Why start here? And this is the argument. Christ had to have a foretaste or a preview of his suffering in order to enter it willingly for you and me. You see, in his humanity, in the human person of Jesus, he had to make a willing choice to save you and me, and he could not make that choice legitimately unless he understood what he was truly getting himself into. Like, God allowed him to have a preview of this so that he could willingly walk into it. Because sometimes you make a decision and you don't quite know what it's going to look like. And so it's like, if you knew what it was going to look like, would you still have made that decision? If you knew what the roller coaster was going to feel like at the top of the pinnacle before you went down, would you have chosen to get on it and go up there? Probably not. right? So this is where Jonathan Edwards helps us get some clarity here. Christ was going to be cast into a dreadful furnace of wrath, and it was not proper that he should plunge himself into it blindfolded. As not knowing how dreadful the furnace was, God first brought him and set him at the mouth of the furnace that he might look in and stand and view its fierce and raging flames, and might see where he was going, and might voluntarily enter into it and bear it for sinners, as knowing what it was. This view Christ had in his agony. Like, my friends, God's love for you and me is costly, and it is good, because he knew what he was walking into. He wasn't surprised when he got to the cross. In his humanity, he made a willing choice under great agony, under great anxiety, under great feelings of being overwhelmed and burdened. He made a choice to go to the cross to save you and me. Like, this actually gives us a deeper understanding of God's love and of Jesus' choice for us. Now, here's the thing. You and I cannot identify with this. This is why Jesus can't just be an example. He's got to be a substitute here in the garden. Because guess what? The comparison that a lot of sermons that I've heard about this compares, like, well, Jesus was in distress and he prayed, so when you're in distress, you should pray. We will never, ever, ever experience this. We will never experience the wrath of God poured out on us. We will never have a cup of God's wrath to drink. Why? Because Jesus has drank it down to the dregs. That is the point. That is why Jesus as a substitute equips us to go to God, because we can go to God knowing that there is nothing left for you and me but grace. There is nothing left for you and me but favor from God towards us, but salvation. Why? Because in the garden, Jesus began to drink of this cup of God's wrath for you and me. And he did it willingly. And so it's not meant to be a comparison or example. That's the point. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be deeper than that. So Jesus is alone. Jesus is in horror. Jesus is in agony in the garden. So that's the first point, the agony. Second, the fall. What Jesus is doing. So let's look at what Jesus is doing and just look at the prayers that he is praying. I've got them on the screen. This is verses 39, 42, and 44. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. He goes out and sees his disciples. He comes back in again for the second time. He went away and prayed, My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done. Again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. So what does Jesus do when he's in this moment? What does he do when he's in this agony? He's feeling overwhelmed. It says he fell on his face. My friends, this is complete exhaustion. This is desperation. This is that feeling of being overwhelmed, this despairing of life. He goes into the garden, into a secret place where he is simply alone with God, and he falls down in desperation. And as he's crumpled on the cold dirt of the Garden of Gethsemane in the middle of the night, he begins to pray. Very simple, short phrases. And we have so much to learn from them that we can't get into today. But there's three things that I want us to see, three elements of the Lord's Prayer that we have to see here that I think is very helpful. The first is, he starts with saying, My Father. My friends, as he begins to sip the cup of God's wrath, he never forgets that God is his Father. That agony that he was feeling went hand in hand with the context to God being his good and loving Father. The second thing that we see is Jesus genuinely prays for his deliverance from this cup of evil and wrath and turmoil. He genuinely is praying. He's saying, please, if there is any other way. This is not simply meant for us to read 2,000 years later. This is a recounting of what actually happened. In the moment, he is saying, if there is another way, please let there be another way. But then the third thing, he literally says, your will be done. This is complete dependence and trust in God's will, asking for it to be done, knowing that it would be at the cost of his life. You see, Jesus knows the answer to his first prayer. When he gets to the second one, he knows the answer. He's saying that there is no other way. And we see this acceptance of God's will, saying, no matter what happens, I trust that you are good and you will do what is best. Now, what's interesting is these three elements are directly reflected in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, we see then, deliver us from evil, right? That's in the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. This is Jesus modeling for us how the Lord's Prayer can be prayed, how we can truly believe these truths in desperate, anxious moments in our lives where we feel overwhelmed. And we see that as Jesus enters into the garden, he's being separated from every human being in his life. He's being separated from his Father, and then turning to God as Father, he trusts him, he depends on him, he brings the deepest part of his desires to God and says, I'm going to lay them at your feet, and I'm going to trust you with the outcome. That's what Jesus is doing. And it's so helpful for us. Why? And that leads us to the third point. It's the garden. What does Jesus' actions teach us about prayer? So let's go back to the plane. Okay, on the plane, I'm sitting there. By the way, they had to move and shift planes. I always try to get an aisle seat so I can stand up and stretch my legs. I'm like smack dab in the middle. And as you can look at me, I'm thinner than I used to be, but I'm still a pretty wide guy. Okay, so I'm pretty uncomfortable. I'm pretty upset. And I'm angry at myself. I'm angry at the situation. Did I spend this money for no reason? And then I'm looking at the time. Okay. And I couldn't stop looking at the time of arrival because I know what time my flight leaves, and I'm looking at the time of arrival and I'm seeing that map of, the curvature thing. And I'm just like, I just feel awful. And here's the thing. My response in that moment is, I think many of our responses when we feel overwhelmed with either small things like a plane or large things like your relationships or like your finances or like your children. All of us can feel these things in these moments. And most of the time, when we feel stuck, when we feel overwhelmed, I think we tend to go towards one of three places. So, feeling overwhelmed, first one we go to is anger. I think many times we go to anger, which says, I'm upset at God and I withdraw from him and his people. So I think sometimes when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel stressed, when we feel that knot in the pit of our stomach, some of us tend to run away from God and say, you know what, I'm done with God, I'm upset, I withdraw from community, I withdraw from God. And that's the anger response when we feel that knot in the pit of our stomach. The second response is similar, but it looks different. It's called fear and hiding. So here's what happens. You hide in plain sight, but you emotionally withdraw and put on a happy face out of fear of judgment from other people, right? So you're really angry with God, but you're still showing up, you're still smiling. How's everything? Oh, everything's great, everything's fine. And I think that's actually a lot of the culture of Clarksville, is everything's great and everything's fine and I'm awesome. And there's always the narrative, especially in the military culture and in the Clarksville culture, that says, well, I was bad 3 months ago, but now I'm doing great. You always meet people on the other end of problems. You ever notice that? How interesting is that? You always meet people on the other end of all of their problems, right? You're like, hey, we've been friends for years, but it's like you're telling me, 3 months ago your life was terrible, but now you're awesome and great. Like, okay, wait a minute, something doesn't jive here, right? And that's the fear and hiding that's really rooted in shame. So when you feel this overwhelmed pit in your stomach, it can be anger, fear, or what I've also found with certain of my friends, especially people that have been through deep trauma, that have been through deep struggles, that have been pervasive over their life, or a lot of my military friends that have been through deep things, it's complacency. So sometimes you can wonder, well, why is God letting this happen to me? Maybe it's just my lot in life. So you kind of throw up your hands and say, you know what? This is the world. This is the way that it is, and life's just going to kind of suck. And that's how you handle the knot in the pit of your stomach. It's just kind of like, this is just going to stink. And you just kind of accept it and move on. So here's the thing. All of these responses make perfect sense unless we have Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Unless we have Jesus being our substitute. Because Jesus being our substitute makes all of these things completely illogical. Like logically, it doesn't make sense. Let me explain. Because Jesus loves us infinitely enough to substitute himself for us and to take God's wrath on our behalf. And God the Father has orchestrated this entire plan to save us. He's orchestrated an entire plan to bring us back to God, back to himself. God the Father has done that. And the Holy Spirit, if you're a follower of Jesus, he indwells the Christian, mediates the grace of Jesus that Jesus earned on the cross into your life continually for your whole life. So if Jesus went into the depths of God's wrath to save you and me, why would he ever give you suffering that is meaningless? Why would he ever do that to you? Why would he ever give you health issues, medical issues, emotional issues, financial issues, personal issues in your life? Why would he ever do that without thinking about what is the best for you? Because he's already been through hell and back for you. Why would he then abandon you on the back end? He's already been through the toughest part. He's shown his power over all these things. So then anything that is allowed, that is permitted to come to us, has a reason. And sometimes there's a million different reasons probably that we probably never will understand until we get to eternity. And to be quite honest, when we get to eternity and we're with Jesus, we're probably not going to care about it anyway. So we probably never will understand why God allows us to go through stuff, right? We probably won't. But our response when these things happen, my friends, is crucial to our peace. And that's what I want us to think about today, is when you're feeling overwhelmed, when you're feeling stuck, when you've got the knot in the pit of your stomach, what is God trying to do, and what does he want you to do? How can you find peace when the train has left the station? And my argument for us today, the main thrust of the application for this, is to go into your garden. Go into your garden. See, the garden for Jesus was a place of quiet, a place of seclusion. And that's where Jesus was completely bare, and he fell on his face before his Father, sharing his realest, rawest emotions. And God did not meet Jesus there. I actually have to say that. Like, Jesus did not experience comfort in the garden. He left more burdened and overwhelmed than he went in. Why? Because he's our substitute. So that you and I, when we go into our garden, when we go into the secret places of our own heart and life and bring our truest, rawest emotions to God, we will always be accepted. Because Jesus was the one who was rejected in those moments of his greatest need. So, it's work to walk into the garden of our hearts. That what I'm talking about, I'm using the garden as kind of an analogy of saying, what is the secret, most realist place of your heart and life? And it takes work to get there. Like who we are in the dark when no one is watching, and what we think about in the dark, what we think about in the darkest places of our mind that we would not share even with our closest friends or spouse. That is who we truly are. And a lot of times we can deceive ourselves into thinking that we're better than we actually are, can't we? Or sometimes we deceive ourselves that we're worse than what we truly are. And so we actually have to come to God with our deepest, rawest emotions saying, I'm not trusting you in this moment. I'm not truly believing the gospel. Like that is part of what it means to get into the garden of our hearts, that secret place before the Lord where we acknowledge who we truly are and what's actually going on. And when you go there and you turn to God in the deepest places of who you are, that is humility and that is dependency. It is an act of faith. The further you go into your inner self, your core motivations, your deepest fears, and you seek God in prayer, my friends, the more you find that Jesus is there. Because guess what? Jesus left the disciples outside of the garden. He went deeper than the disciples went. And my friends, Jesus goes deeper into your secret places of your heart than you do. That's the beautiful thing. The deeper you go into your core motivations, the deeper you go into your deepest fears and struggles and heartbreaks and temptations, all of those things, Jesus is already there. He's entered into the deepest places of your own soul, and he knows you better than you know yourself, and he's waiting for you to turn to him. He's waiting for you to reorient your life, your perspective on him, bringing him your realest, rawest you in the garden. Go into the garden. So here's some practical applications for this. When you're feeling overwhelmed and stuck, what do you do? Well, there's 4 things. 1, enter into your garden. like truly understand, what am I believing about God and myself? And get face to face with who you truly are. And when you do that, the next step is so important, because if you just see that, that's going to leave you in despair. But the second thing is cling to God as your Father. Like when God is your Father, that reorients all of his activity to benefit and care for you. Like a good father loves you, cares for you, pursues you. And nothing happens within your life that is outside of his sovereign control, which means that what happens is ultimately going to be for his glory and your good. So cling to him as your Father. He's a good Father that loves you. Third, ask real and bold questions of God. Like most of the time we treat prayer, and I think by God's grace and through Pastor Derek's efforts here with this sermon series, we're seeing that prayer is just more than asking requests of God. But that can be a very easy way to come to God and to say, okay, can you heal me of this? Can you please give me $5,000 in my bank account? Can you please give me a free car? Please, can you give me all these things? Like, it's really easy and surface level, but you actually, transformative prayer is when you go into the secret places of your own heart and you bring those things to God and say, I know you're my Father, but this is what I'm truly struggling with. This is the depth of what I'm trying to, and ask real and bold questions of God. And then finally, accept the will of God as perfect no matter what. Like you leave the outcome to the Lord, and there's an incredible freedom that happens when we pray and leave the outcome to God. And here's the thing. I can't be up here and tell you that when you do this, everything in your life is going to be resolved. It won't, and it probably won't be. All right, that's the challenge and the beauty of the gospel, is that it's not a quick fix. But you see, our Lord wants us in a posture of humility and dependence on him, because that is a sane way of thinking. That is us coming back into sanity, to see and acknowledge ourselves for who we truly are, seeing us as desperate and in need of him every second of every day. And when we cry to him, our cry for help is humbling. It is dependent. It is training us. It is transforming our hearts. And it gives us the trust of a child in their father. And guess what? When you trust and you're safe with your parents, you eventually begin to laugh. That's what happens when you are safe and with your parents. Now, I bet you maybe in 5 or 10 seconds, that child could be crying because they didn't get the toy in their mouth as quickly as they wanted to, okay? They didn't get the dangerous thing that would kill them in their mouth, all right? And they're going to cry and scream. But what happens is that you can reorient to joy when you're in safety around your parent that loves you, right? You have immediate circumstances, but you have a bedrock that you go back to. Just like that child has a bedrock of safety with Abby and Jaime, because they are good parents that love their child. And so even though the child is screaming that I can't put this dangerous bead in my mouth and choke on it, okay, which is oftentimes, let's just say, most of the things that we're overwhelmed and anxious about, like Christopher said, they're going to be dust 1,000 years from now, right? But guess where we're going to be? If you're a follower of Jesus, 1,000 years from now, you are going to be with glory with your Father in heaven. And you're going to be experiencing more delight than that child who's laughing back there is every second of every day. So let's think about that when we're engaging with these problems and difficulties that twist us, that bring us into anxiety. And why can we do that? How can we do that? How does it change us? How does it reorient us to see ourselves like that little baby laughing in the back? Well, I'm going to go back to my flight again. Okay, you're probably sick and tired of hearing this stupid flight, and I was sick and tired of being on it, okay? But this is how the sermon wrapped up, so this is how we're going to wrap up. The last hour of the flight, I had to make a change. I was miserable. Like I said, I was a ball of anxiety, pit in my stomach, and here's what I realized. I actually had to go into the garden of my own heart. Here's what I realized. I was being an atheist. I was an atheist in that moment. You're like, Josh, wait a minute. You're a pastor and you're telling me you were being an atheist? Yes, I was. 100% I was being an atheist in that moment. Here's why. I'm going away on gospel ministry. I'm teaching people about Jesus. I'm doing multiple continents of gospel ministry, and yet flying back, I was not believing that God was real. If God is real and sovereign, of course he will work out me getting home. But I'm sitting there looking at the time ticking over and over and over again. And there's actually a picture of this. Could you throw that picture up? This is what I was looking at the entire time. And I'm just saying time to destination, 3:49. Time to destination, 3:52. It's supposed to be going down, not up, okay? But it's going up. The time's going up as we're flying because it's getting delayed, right? This is what's going on in my heart. I am living like an atheist. Like either God's not real or he's not in control or he doesn't love me. That's what I'm living like in that moment. That's why I'm stressed. That's why I'm anxious. I'm living like God doesn't exist. And I'm a pastor that's been on a mission trip for 2 weeks. So here's what I had to do. I turned off the screen. I turned on some music and I prayed. I went into the garden of my heart like I'm encouraging you guys to do. And I literally held my hands up and I spent an entire hour repenting of my lack of belief. And I'm like, I cannot keep looking at this stupid clock. It's going to be what it is. And so I was determined after, it took an hour. I still was stressed and anxious. But after about an hour, I started to get a little bit calmer. And I'm like, I'm just keep my eyes closed until we land. Like, I'm not even going to open my eyes. So I didn't do that. So we landed. And I was kind of determined that I'm going to leave the plane. I'm going to get my bag and I'm going to slowly walk to the gate, even though I knew that unless something happened, I would miss my flight. But I'm going to do everything in peace. I'm going to get to my gate. If it's God's will for me to be on that flight, I'll be on it. He'll delay it. If it's not, I'll figure something out. Now, I wish I could tell you I followed that plan, but I did not. I was like, oh, that'd be super spiritual of me to be like, oh, I just felt so at peace. And I just walked out on a little cloud and I was just walking around Atlanta airport. And it was fantastic. No, I didn't do that. As soon as we landed, I looked at the time. I was like, I actually could make it. Even if it's not delayed, I could make it. I left my bag. I was like, I'll get it later. So I left my bag in Atlanta. I strapped my backpack and I sprinted through that airport. And I mean, I sprinted. And I'm like, TSA, I get to one of the TSAs, my flight is boarding right now. I need it. I need to get through. And it was like, people were so kind. That like the Red Sea parted and they got me. I had people cheering me on like, you can make it. You can make it. I'll still never forget this one guy. He's like, you can do it, man. And so I'm like sprinting. Okay. And I'm not, you can look at me. I'm not a sprinter. Okay. And I'm sprinting through Atlanta airport. I find the gate. I run up the stairs. The gate's right there near where the escalator was. And all the people are waiting to board. And I'm like, oh my God, I made it. And I just went, oh, and I just collapsed. I literally collapsed. I'm just pouring sweat. And I had been running like a mile through this stupid airport. You know what's crazy? The flight was delayed by an hour. I could have totally made it. I could have, if I just followed the plan that I felt the Lord leading me to on the plane, I would have made it perfectly fine. I ended up getting my bags a week later. It was fine. But like, I just, you know what the thing is? My anxiety and my stress and me not staying on peace, it actually didn't ultimately change the outcome. It just made it suck worse for me. Like I was just sweaty. I was just like, I didn't have a great last flight home. And I just sat there for an hour like a doofus waiting and I could have just walked and been normal, right? And so that's the thing. I caused more work for myself than what I needed to. And my friends, when you are feeling overwhelmed and anxious, when you're feeling the knot in the pit of your stomach, turning away in anger or fear or complacency, it's not doing anything to God. It just causes more work in your life. It causes more pain in your own heart. And I don't want that for you. I want you to live in hope and joy, even in the midst of suffering and pain. So why can we trust that the prayers in the garden will work? My friends, Jesus goes deeper into the garden than we do. He knows us better than ourselves. He's present in all of our fear, in all of our anger, and all of our complacency. And he's already entered deeper into the garden than we ever could, which means that when you go into the deepest places of who you are and then you reorient your heart to God and you pray honest prayers and you trust him, my friends, he is already there. And you see, the real truth of the gospel is that Jesus was not saved from the wrath of God, so that when we feel under his wrath, we can rest assured that all we are going to get is grace. And that's the gospel for you. And that's Jesus' work in the Garden of Gethsemane for you and me. And all of this is possible because of Jesus' work on the cross.
Thank you for listening. We gather every Sunday at the Clarksville area YMCA. For more information, please go to our website at redeeminghope.org.